All right, let's jump into the final part of our little mini-series on relationships. And we've been talking about the building block of relationships, these bids for connection or emotional bids. And God has created us, as we've been talking about throughout this series, as very social, relational creatures. And as a result of that, this whole idea, of Adam, God saying to Adam, it's not good for the man to be alone, is not just about someone living in isolation in a basement somewhere, although that's very sad too. It's the fact that as human beings, we swim in a sea of these bids for connection. Every single day, we're looking for connection from the people around us, at work, at home, at play, everywhere we go. So the building block of relationships. Now, today we're going to spend our entire time on one small but profound little verse. And we're going to read this verse over and over again throughout the sermon because it just ties so perfectly into this series. And it's Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2. And it says this, "Always be humble and gentle, be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love." All right, I want everybody to say making allowance, because this whole message is brought to you by those two words, making allowance. Everybody? Making allowance. An entire message about the profound impact in our relationships of making allowance for each other's faults. Now, one of the reasons I think this is so profound is because Paul assumes that we're not going to be able to get rid of all of our faults. Notice that Paul does not say, if you're going to have good relationships and if you're going to be loving people, what you need to do is stop being selfish and stop being a jerk. Very helpful things. And we should actually work on them. But there is a sense in which we're never actually going to make it. So if we're going to actually love well and have healthy relationships, Paul assumes there's always going to be faults. So one of the keys to relationships is we're going to have to learn how to make allowance for each other's faults. Now, some of you are wondering, what is this going to have to do with what we've been talking about in this series and bids for connection, all that? That's all going to become clear. But before we go any further, I do want to start this message off with one big caveat, spelled C-A-V-E-A-T. If you don't know what a caveat is, let me show it to you in action. All right? Because I don't want this message misused. Some bad people will take a message like this and use it to victimize the people around them. They'll just say, hey, you have to put up with my junk because Kris said you have to make allowance for my faults. First of all, before I even put up the next 2 points, I want to tell you this. This is not a verse you use on someone else about your faults. The moment you do that, I want you to hear me yelling in your ear, you are misusing this sermon. But second of all, some things are not included, in making allowance. So for the rest of this sermon, I just want to make sure you know, making allowance for faults does not apply to abuse or big betrayals of trust. What do I mean by that? A spouse, you're in a workplace, an abusive workplace, or you're in an abusive marriage or an abusive dating relationship or some kind of abusive relationship, and the abuser says, you have to put up with my faults. No, this is not talking about abuse. You need to get out of that relationship. You need to get outside help. You need to get protection, not make allowance for these kinds of things. Second of all, big betrayals of trust. I could see an employee, stealing money from their boss, and they come to Crossview on the weekend. Of course, no Crossview person would ever do such a thing. But maybe they watched it on YouTube. They go to another church. And then they steal from their boss, and then the boss says, I got to do something about this. I got to fire you, or there's got to be some kind of discipline. And they say, no, you have to put up with my faults. No. Putting up with faults does not have to do, or, like a major betrayal of trust in a marriage, like adultery or something like that. I'm not saying that stuff like that has to break up a relationship. I'm just saying even those relationships that are going to keep it together after a big betrayal of trust, it's not going to be because they just made allowance for each other's faults. They're going to have to work through the hurt. They're going to have to get help for healing. There's going to have to be repentance, all sort of stuff. This sermon is not covering these kinds of things, and Paul's message to make allowance for faults does not cover these categories of things. Does that make sense? Raise your hand if that makes sense. Don't raise your hand if that didn't make sense. Okay, we're going to move on anyway. All right, so, well, what kind of faults then does this cover? So I'm going to give you a few examples. You don't need to write this down. Some people feel compelled to write down everything I put on the screens. This is just to help you get a sense of stuff. These are just examples. I'm going to take some examples from marriage because it's going to be easy to see from that how this applies to all kinds of different things in all kinds of different relationships. But what are some of the kinds of things that Paul would have us make allowance for in relationships? Some examples from marriage. One could be, person A is too loud at parties, and person B, who is shy, finds that embarrassing, right? Do not look at your spouse if this is a problem in your marriage. All right? Okay, that kind of stuff can be a problem, right? And it might look, it's funny when you're not married, but after 20 years, a little pebble can be a big boulder. Okay? Husband is messy and lax about housework, and wife nags him about it, which makes him angry. Again, just stare straight ahead. Do not acknowledge that this is taken from your life. Mom thinks dad is too critical of their son, but dad thinks the son needs a firm hand. These are some big issues, right? Disagreements. How do we handle, discipline? How do we handle kids? And they can be pretty big disagreements. How do we handle these sorts of things? All right? Or here's a fourth example. Spouse A is perpetually late to stuff, and spouse B thinks that's disrespectful. I will not look in the direction of my wife. And by the way, I'm the problem, okay? As soon as I said that, I'm like, they're all going to blame her. No, I'm the problem on that one. All right? But these are the kinds of things. All right, so now you say, oh, nice, I see what you did there with your wife. You said she has to make allowance for your faults. So that brings up the big question then. What is Paul talking about? Are we just supposed to ignore? So what Kris is saying here is, or what Paul is saying more importantly is, if there are, problems in a relationship, marriage, at work, whatever it is, making allowance just means you ignore it, you pretend it's not there, you shove it down. You don't say anything. You just passive-aggressive until you blow. Well, obviously, that can't be right. But that's something we gotta look at. So what does that mean to make allowance? We just pretend it's not a problem. But there's a second question, and we're going to come to this one later. We're going to deal with the second question first. Why do some relationships, have you ever noticed this? Some relationships just seem to have more room for error. You ever notice that? Same problem, different relationships. Same problem, different friendships. Same problem, different marriage relationships. Same problem, different workplaces. Some relationships, that problem blows it up. All kinds of negativity, criticism, anger, fighting, resentment, withdrawal. Same problem, another relationship, they're able to kind of laugh it off, kind of tease each other maybe a little bit, and they move on. How is this possible? I think of something like planning a Christmas gathering when all the kids are grown up, right? So now the adult siblings have to plan a Christmas gathering. And you imagine two different families, right? And I've seen every type. But you imagine two different families, okay? And they got to plan the Christmas gathering. In both cases, it's equally complicated. How are you going to find a date that works for everybody? How are you going to find a venue that pleases everyone? How are you going to decide on this gathering? Now, in one family, they start to have this discussion. It starts with a text on a WhatsApp group chat, and it devolves, woohoo, very quickly. It becomes personal. Like any little problem, someone has to miss, or if the date doesn't work, people are withdrawing or they're exploding. There's resentment. You just see it's touchy. You think maybe the problem is Christmas. The problem is not Christmas. Same problem, same level of complexity. Another family, they discuss it. They all have the same amount of busyness. They have the same problem finding a date. Eventually they settle on a date. Someone can't come. Of course, there's disappointment. Shoot, I can't make it, whatever it is. But there's enough positivity that the the positivity just seems to kind of carry it through. They go over a bump and they keep going. How is it that some relationships seem to have more room for error. More room for error. Now, I want to just focus on that room for error because actually I think that's a great way of coming back to Paul here in Ephesians 4. I think that's a great way of looking at this idea of making allowance for each other's faults. I think we could say that as making room for error. How do we invest in our relationships in such a way that we have room for error? Because Paul says there's going to be error. So how do we invest in our relationships in such a way that we have room for error so when the withdrawals come, we're going to have space? So I want to introduce to you an idea now that psychologists often use when they're talking about relationships that I think ties in perfectly with this idea of making allowance, making room for error. All right? And the idea is you think of your relationship. It could be marriage, it could be a work relationship, it could be a relationship with your adult siblings, whatever the case, your kids. And think about that each relationship you have as having a kind of relational bank account. And every time you have a positive interaction with a person or people in that relationship, you are making a deposit. All right? And of course, we have different levels of relationship. Okay, right? So, the kind of deposits you can make with a spouse or with a close friend, and the kind of deposit you can make with someone you just kind of know casually at work is going to be very different. But the truth is the same across all of them. Any positive interaction is a deposit. So, your coworker drops by your desk. This is just a small example for a lower level relationship. Your coworker stops by your desk, tells you a joke, you laugh at it, positive interaction. There's just been a deposit in the bank account. You remember a coworker's birthday and send them a funny little GIF or GIF. I think GIF is the appropriate pronunciation. But anyway, you send them a little birthday GIF on their birthday, positive interaction. That's a little deposit in the bank account. All right? Now, any negative interaction is a withdrawal. All right? So, sending a text on the birthday, that's positive. Smiling and waving. A hug. You hug your wife after, she comes home from work. She just some big accomplishment. You give her a big hug. Oh, I'm so proud of you, whatever the case is. Positive. Negative, your boss comes by your desk and reams you out for something. Doesn't even ask you your side of the story. Just comes and boom, right into it. Negative interaction. There's a withdrawal in the relationship. All right? And then if you have no interaction, it just stays at zero. Now, here's the thing about a relational bank account. When you have deposits built up, there's regular positive interactions. You have space for, you have room for withdrawals. So a good friend, someone you've been friends with for 15 or 20 years, and you have regular interactions. You talk all the time. You share stuff. You hang out regularly. There's lots of positive interactions. All of a sudden, one day, they get snippy. Or they have a couple of days where they're snippy. Or they ignore your text for a day or two. If you have been having lots of positive interactions, there's a big gap. There's lots of room for error. You're going to assume the best about them. You're going to assume, hey, they must be having a bad week. What's going on? Something must be wrong. You're not going to assume they don't like you. You're not going to assume that they want to be mean to you and hurt you because there's lots of deposits. You have room for withdrawals. Now imagine someone you don't know at work. You've never talked to them. You've just seen them. They are all of a sudden drop by your desk and are just rude to you. Just absolutely rude or cut you off. They might do the same thing to you that your good friend did. The problem is your bank account with this person you don't know is at zero. You don't have room for error in that relationship. Immediately you assume the worst. That is a bad person. I don't like that person. They were bad to me. You talk about that person when you get home that night, the next few days, when you're at home with your spouse or with your friends or whatever, you say, yes, so-and-so at work, just whatever, because you had no room for error. So, one of the keys to following through on Paul. See, normally when we read that verse in Ephesians 4, we just think Paul's telling us to white knuckle it. Make allowance. Woo! I'm just going to make allowance. But we don't actually know how to get to a place where we can emotionally make allowance. The way you get to a place where you can make allowance is you invest in the relationship regularly. Now again, there's different levels. I'm going to show you this later. There's different levels of relationship. You can't have 100 best friends. Okay, you can have, depending on your relational capacity, best friends are few and far between. You can only have one spouse. You can have a few kids, right? But you only have a certain number of people that you can give high attention to. But whatever the case, to whatever level the relationship is, you make regular positive interactions and connections. Regular. You actually talk to your spouse. So in the case of a person who's married, you talk to your spouse daily, positive interactions. So that the relationship has the cushion it needs for the withdrawals that will be inevitable. They are inevitable in every relationship if you're close enough for long enough, right? Now, here's the problem. There's a big assumption that most of us, I think many of us, particularly as Christians, have that causes us to focus on the wrong thing. Our assumption is that if you are in a good relationship, if you have a real close friendship, or you've been working, you have a business partner, you've been with 10 or 15 years, or whatever it is, or you're married, whatever it is, that in the good relationships, this is our assumption, will eventually solve all of their problems. That's the assumption. So then our energy goes into, we got to eliminate the problems. We got to eliminate the withdrawals. And by the way, not all bad. Obviously, there are problems we want to try and solve. And every problem is something ultimately we want to solve. But the idea that we think a good relationship is the one where I solve them all actually puts us off on the wrong track. Because as Paul says, I want to remind you again, he assumes you are always going to have faults. So I want to show you some mind-blowing statistics now, all right? And this comes from marriage, but that's because marriage is the easy one to study, all right? But it applies across relationships, right? So I want to show you something real mind-blowing, and I think this is going to help you, and there's going to be a shift in the way you view relationships in general, okay? So this is Dr. John M. Gottman. Isn't he a cute-looking guy? Very smart, an absent-minded kind of professor type, all right? He has spent over 50 years, right? He's a Jewish American. I cut his wife out of this photo just because I don't want to complicate things, but he's married and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, he has spent his entire life, the last 50 years, his career, studying relationships. He's a psychologist and a researcher, and his focus is very specific: divorce prediction and marital stability. So his obsession for decades has been, if I study thousands of couples, and he's literally studied tens of thousands of couples, can I identify in advance with high degree of accuracy who is likely to divorce and who is likely not to divorce? And he actually can do that now quite reliably. I think it's like over 90%. It's impressive. Anyway, he wrote a couple of books. I'm just going to put up a couple of book recommends if you want to check this out. One of them is 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. If you're married, that is the best book I've ever encountered on marriage. It is phenomenal, okay? I give this to I wait a month or two, and I give this book to every couple that I marry. Like, do the ceremony. I don't marry different people. But anyway, you know what I mean. Another book, if you're not married, another great book he's written is The Relationship Cure, a 5-step guide to strengthening your marriage, family, and friendships. Anyway, so early in his career, he's interviewing literally thousands of couples. And his assumption going in is so he wants to see, he's interviewing bad marriages, good marriages, everything in between, and he wants to see what's the difference between them. His assumption is the good couples are the ones, they are so good at communicating. They just talk through their stuff. When there's a problem, they identify it, they talk about it, they work through it, and then presto, it's gone. So he's interviewing thousands of couples, and then every 4 years, he does a follow-up, and part of the follow-up is to figure out what problems have they worked through. Like in the good marriages, his thesis was, in the good marriages, you're going to see these problems slowly drop off as they work through and solve more and more problems. And he was shocked over the first decade and a half of his research to find that the good couples did not solve more problems than the bad couples. In fact, he found that there was two types of problems in marriage. There are solvable problems and there are unsolvable problems. I want you in your mind to guess what percentage of problems in marriage were unsolvable. Don't shout it out, just think to yourself. 15%, maybe 20%, 3%, okay? So you have a number in your head of what you think are unsolvable problems in a marriage. Here's the actual number. 69%. Some of you are like, we're normal, thank God. 69. This is thousands and thousands of couples. By the way, they've repeated this study over and over. 69% of marriage problems they found are unsolvable. In fact, him and some of the people he was partnered with, they were just shocked, and they've repeated this over and over again. This is one of the quotes from one of the psychologists that has done a lot of work with him. The man's name is Dan Walls. I couldn't fit it on the thing here, but he says this about marriage, all right? So talk about changing the way you think about marriage. When choosing a long-term partner, you will inevitably be choosing a particular set of unsolvable problems. Do not look at your spouse that you will be grappling with for the next 10, 20, or 50 years. Some of you are like, is this good news or what is this? Now, I want to just think, how many of you are spending hours and hours and hours on your knees praying to God to change your spouse? I could save you some time. 69% of those prayers are not getting answered. Suddenly you're starting to realize, wait a minute, Paul might have been onto something. One of the keys in relationship, by the way, and this just goes so far beyond marriage. This goes to all of our human relationships, but it's just easiest to show the example through marriage. If you are going to succeed as a human being in human relationships, one of the most important things you can do is learn how to make allowance for each other's faults. I love this conclusion that they came to, was this: marriages, and I just put in brackets their relationships because lots of people here aren't married, but marriages, relationships are successful to the degree that the problems you choose are the ones you can cope with. Make allowance for. There is no perfect spouse. There is no perfect boss. There is no perfect employee. There is no perfect friend. Your relationships are going to be successful to the degree that the problems you choose are the ones you can cope with. Wow. So, good relationships are not going to solve all their problems. So, what's the difference between the good relationships and the bad relationships? What's the difference between the family at Christmas, that it's complicated and it devolves into resentment and withdrawal and fighting and bad feelings, and the other family that has the same problem, but they just kind of get through it. There's disappointment, there's like, shoot, that didn't work out, blah, 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 blah. There's all that, but they just seem to get through it. Here's the difference. In good relationships, the problems are minor irritations swimming in a sea of positive interactions. That's the difference. The difference is not that the good relationships get rid of all their problems. They might get rid of some, 31%, but the bad relationships will do that too. The difference is, in the good relationships, so the Christmas gathering in the good relationship family, it's an irritant swimming in a sea. Siblings that joke throughout the year and get together and love to hang out, compared to siblings who maybe never talk. It might not be bad. They might just be at zero. And the only time they talk every year is to plan the Christmas gathering. In some cases, it would be better for them not to have a gathering, perhaps. There's just no contact all year, and then your only contact is negative. Suddenly, the negative dwarfs. The negative is the mountain that dwarfs the little puddle of positive interactions. So the key is not to focus all of our attention and intention on getting rid of the problem. It's to create and invest in so many positive interactions that you have an ocean of goodness that you're swimming in for when you hit the sour patches. So, now, you remember that first question I asked. So does this mean the good relationships ignore their problems? No. So I'm actually going to use an example that I took from one of the couples in some of the studies these people did. All right, because I didn't want to use an example that was one of you guys or something I overheard or that's personal. So if this talks to you, I didn't pick it for you. But let's think about Carmen and Bill. All right? Carmen's a woman, just in case you're wondering. Some of the names can go both ways now. So Carmen and Bill. Carmen and Bill are a happy couple. They have two opposite personalities when it comes to orderliness. Carmen is like a drill sergeant in her discipline, in her tidiness, in her orderliness and cleanness. She grew up in a home like that, and that's what she likes. When things are in disarray and chaos, she feels anxious. It's not a good feeling. She likes things in order. The schedule, the house. Bill is your classic absent-minded professor. He constantly is misplacing things. He forgets to pick things up. All right? Now, it's not that Carmen ignores it. So you say, well, this is a happy couple, so, and maybe they're Christians. So when she reads, make allowance for each other's faults, what she does when she finds a half-empty coffee mug behind the stack of books in the TV room is she just bites her tongue and goes, I'm just a bond servant of Christ. And I'm just so thankful for what a good man he is, and that's why I picked this up for the 1,000th time, and that's what godliness is. Too many Christians think that way. That is not how you have a good marriage. That's how you press things down so every 3 weeks you blow up. That's how you get yourself just stick that stuff way down. And eventually you're too tired to hold it down and poof. So Carmen does not ignore that Bill makes this mistake. Also, Bill is not a jerk in a sense that, he's not a husband where he's like, I don't need to change that. He actually works at it. It's a good relationship. He wants to be better, but he's the absent-minded professor. That's the thing. It'll never all go away. So Carmen's cleaning up somewhere, and she finds this half-empty coffee mug. Now, on a good day, she might address it with humor, but she will address it. He's sitting somewhere doing his thing. His hair is askew. He's reading an important book of something. And she'll hold up, maybe hold her nose a little bit and go, Bill, jeepers. And he'll be right away. Again, note how he responds important too. No defensiveness, no like, would you quit nagging me? It's like, oh shoot, I forgot. Hop up, grab it, clean it up, right? That's a good day. As pastors, we always love to share the good days, right? On a bad day, she might use one of the more minor swear words. Not the major ones, but the minor ones. Borderline acceptable. Bill, I hate that I have to clean this coffee mug up again. Oh, shoot, sorry. Later, she likes shoulder rubs. He gives her a little shoulder rub as contrition, and they move on with their day. That's how happy couples work. It's not that the problem is ignored. It's not that the problem ultimately goes away. It's not that they don't care about the problem. But the fact is, it'll just go through cycles. He just is that way. He'll get better for a while, then he'll get worse. He wants to get better, and she's able to talk. That's what making allowance is. Sometimes she'll raise her voice because she's a bit tired. On a good day, she'll laugh about it. But that's how good relationships work. That's what making allowance looks like. Now, we could look at like literally 6 or 7 different kind of applications of how to make allowance. We just have time for 2. So let me give you 2 specific things. In your relationships, in your marriage, at work, whatever it is, how do we practically put this into practice that we can be the kind of people who, we don't ignore the problems, we don't pretend they're not there, but we can handle them in such a way that we have room for error, that we're not making massive withdrawals, okay? 2 important things. First one has to do with the difference between honesty and criticism. Now, I want you to notice, the option here is not ignore. Choose ignoring the problem instead of criticism. No. Ignoring is it won't work. The fact of the matter is, if you're bugged about something, you're bugged about it. Holding it in won't unbug you. But the key is, how are you going to address it in such a way that isn't draining the relational bank account and destroying it? Criticism will destroy your relational bank account. Honesty won't, however, particularly if it's gentle. By the way, let me just show you. I wish we had more time. If we had a whole hour, I'd go back to this verse because there's some key things in here. But look at this. Always be humble and gentle. Gentleness is part of the answer for how you make allowance for faults, but not ignoring the problem, but being gentle in how you address it. So what's the difference between honesty and criticism? Let me show you 3 differences between honesty and criticism. First difference is honesty focuses on actions, criticism attacks character. These are 2 totally different things. Good couples, good relationships, they naturally do this. Bad relationships naturally tend to do this. What's the difference? Carmen finds half-empty coffee mug. She screams at Bill, "You're a slob, you pig." Notice it's focused on him and his character. "You're disgusting. You're a lazy bum." All of these things. By the way, what parents do, what are you saying to your kids? How do you deal with your kids? How do you deal with people at work? Is it right to the personal attack, or is it focused on the action? Notice with Carmen, they're a happy couple. The focus is on the action. Hold up the coffee mug. "Oh, Bill, you left your mug." He gets up. It's something he can do about it. It's not he's bad. It's just the action missed it. Does that make sense? There's a huge difference. Criticism focuses on the character. That's a huge difference. Stay away from criticism. Criticism, not only does it not work, it will drain whatever relationship you're in. Criticism will drain that relational bank account, and quickly. Second difference between honesty and criticism, very tied to this, specific, general. Carmen, you never pick up after yourself. How do you even respond to that? We've all had this done to us. You never pick up after yourself. You always leave your stuff around. You're always late. Like, surely it can't be always. It's always. You never this, you always this. It's vague and it's general. There's no way to defend yourself. You know, a person, when that's laid on them, that feels deeply attacking. Huge drain. Honesty is very specific. I don't like it. It really bothers me when you leave your coffee cups around. It really bothers me when we're 5 minutes till we got to get somewhere and you're just getting out of the shower. It's very specific. It's not ignoring it. It's addressing it, but it's the action. It's not the person. You don't realize how this is a small thing in terms of the energy and the words coming out of your mouth. It's a massive thing in terms of the tone and the feeling and the future of that relationship. And lastly, honesty is close to the moment. Criticism, long after and repeated. We often laugh in our family sometimes, but, people will have memories, and I have memories, right? But, there's a memory. Oh, yeah, remember all these years ago or all these months ago when you did this? And then the person is like, I don't remember that at all. Well, yeah, but you did it. Long after, it's repeated, it's general. You always tax the character. These are all frustrating things in the moment. My wife is actually quite good at this. I have some very annoying tendencies. One of them, some of these are just, they're weird, but just to show just a couple things how this can look. I'm so happy I married her. But one of the things is, I have these things I repeat over and over again. So one of them is, I read this, how many of you were in high school way back in the 90s and you read a book called Ethan Frome? Can you remember Ethan Frome? Just a terrible book. I am not recommending it to anyone. I had to read it for high school. But I have this weird tick where anytime the name Ethan comes up in a conversation at home, I have to just say Ethan Frome. So someone will be talking about Ethan at school did this, or Ethan at work did this, or Ethan something at camp, or blah, 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 and then I just wait for a moment of silence and I say Ethan Frome. It's just such a stupid thing. I don't even realize I'm doing it. The other day we're at the supper table, and everyone's like, do you have to say Ethan Frome every time? And I'm like, oh, yeah, good point. Close to the moment, she didn't say, like, get yourself checked out. There's something mentally wrong with you. She didn't attack. She didn't go general. But right in the moment, and she was very good about it. And part of my problem is defensiveness, but we won't get into that because we just don't have time. But she just focused on the action. Like, do you have to say Ethan Frome every time the word Ethan comes up? Well, I guess I don't. I don't think I've done it in the last week and a half. Okay? I'm like a week and a half sober. My brother and I have this other thing. And any of you know my brother Stefan. We love to clap loudly. It's, again, as I say it out loud in front of people, it's like, that really is not a good thing. So a few years ago at my Duerksen family gatherings, we started this thing where, and there's 17 grandkids, right? So there's lots of grandkids, and they each have to open their presents separately. All right? So, of course, we started something, and I'm assuming it was him. And he is just temptation for me on some of those things, and he drags me into the darkness. But anyway, we started this thing where we would just start to clap very loudly in a confined space with many, many people there. And we would just chant the child's name while clapping loudly, rhythmically. Sarah, Sarah. And we'd get everybody to do it, and it would be just like thunderous, meaningless noise for no purpose at the gathering. Now again, LaDawn, bless her soul, she could just say, like, you are a moron. I'm not sleeping in the same room with you anymore. You're always an idiot. And no, what does she do? In that case, I think she waited almost a year till the next Christmas gathering, and then she just said, like, I don't know if I can come, like, I don't know if I can be present for the gift opening part anymore because I get a splitting headache. Oh, from what, I say? From what? Whatever could give you a headache at my Duerksen family gathering. Like, it just sounds so fun to me. And, oh, the clapping is so loud. And then it's like, but she's specific. Focus on the action. Specific. You know, close to the moment. It's not like you're always just completely, what is the matter with you? It's like, you know, I don't, and then it's gentle. Like, I don't know if I can be there for that part. And it's like, okay, well, I got to pull back. Now, I can't really stop my brother, so it's still happening right now, but I don't do it anymore. I just stand behind her and hold her ears and try not to encourage everybody. But choose honesty, not criticism. Massively, massively important, right? Choice number 2, and this is all we have time for today. So, choose gentle honesty instead of criticism. Choose attention. Now, this is the important one. This is the thing that ties in with this whole series we've been talking about, bids for connection. You are never going to get rid of all the problems in your relationship. However, you can invest in building an ocean of goodwill, an ocean of positive interaction, so that when you hit the negative stuff, it's minor irritation swimming in an ocean of positivity. And one of the ways we do that is we choose attention. We give attention at work, we give attention to our kids, we give attention to our spouse, we give attention to our friends. We give attention instead of distraction. Now notice I say more than, not always, because always is impossible. 90% of the time, probably impossible, but more than. More than. Small things repeated over and over again add up to a big difference. So here's one between friends. When your friend, now a lot of people complain about texting totally, and I have a lot of sympathy for that. But the point is, if you and your friends text, if you've got that thing going, then ignoring their texts is distraction over attention. Now, I'm not saying you have to get back right away. And by the way, young people, why are you texting on the job? Unless it has to do with you're getting paid. And in order to get paid, you need to text. Now, I just heard some of the young people groan, and some of the old people go, yeah, nail them. But when you're getting paid, minimum wage now is like, wow. You know, when I was my first full-time job after high school, I got paid $6 an hour. Amen, someone said. I wouldn't be able to afford 3 loaves of bread on that anymore. But when you're at work texting on the job, no, that's not what we're talking about. But you have a relationship with your friends, and part of what your relationship is now involves texting. Well, since it does, if you're not getting back within 24 hours, if you're not getting back, when you have opportunity during the day, I'm not saying you have to get back within 30 seconds or while you're at work. Absolutely not. Don't be. But the point is, when you have friends and you text them something and they don't get back to you for 3 or 4 days or just ghost you, I know what that is. When they ghost you, that is aura losing. No, just kidding. Some of you have no idea what that even means. I just thought of it just now and I put it in there. Aura farming, aura losing. I just wanted to say aura farming in a message, and I did it before I went on holidays. But anyway, when you just ignore someone, you don't get back to them, what does that feel like? Did they get my text? Did they respond to me? Like, you're just ignoring them. When your kids come home and you just say nothing to them, there's no words exchanged. I'm not saying you have to give them the Inquisition. They don't like that either. So, how did your day go? Who did you all talk to? Ha, ha, ha. Be quiet. But even just to say, hi, hey, glad to see you. Right? Do you have connect? Do you talk? If you're married, there should be regular input and connection of like chatting and talking, and it doesn't. By the way, part of this whole study of tens of thousands of couples, one of the assumptions they thought was the best married couples are the ones who share the deepest. Oh, they just go deep. The vulnerability is just so deep. And of course, people love those kinds of assumptions because they're still in the dating stage. But if you've been married, by the way, has any of you who've been married, if you've been married 15, 20, 25 years or longer, how much deep new stuff do you have every day or every week? Like, please, and if you're just repeating the same thing over and over again, why? So yeah, good couples will have the ability to share deep and share vulnerable and sort of stuff, but you know what they actually found? It wasn't the deep, deep, deep stuff. They found that the best couples, the ones who are most likely to stay married and stay happy, they just had lots of little interactions. Like, so-and-so is watching the curling, and they're like, hey, did you see that shot? I don't know why I use curling. I know nothing about curling, but did you see that? And she looks up and goes, oh, hey, that's so cool. And she does something. And they just have lots of just these little interactions. They just notice each other. There's attention. It's the same is true for all of our relationships. Choose attention more than distraction. Now, again, I mentioned this before, so I just want to put it up there so you see this. It is not possible to give maximum attention to many, many people. There's going to be different levels of this. You know, if you're married or you have kids who are still at home, you can ignore them as soon as they move out. But while they're still at home, spouse and kids, it's going to take daily attention. Now, every single day. I'm not saying, we're not turning this into some kind of new legalism. My point is, it's going to take some kind of daily attention. I'm going to pay attention to you very regularly. Regular attention, close friends, coworkers, family members you're close to, regular, whatever regular means, but it'll be regular. If you want to keep that bank account up, it's going to be regular. Then there's other people, it's just sort of as needed or when you meet. There's the people, here at church, you sit close to them, you smile, you share a little bit, it's fun. But it's just when you see each other at church, right? Acquaintances, people at church, neighbors, all those sorts of things, right? So there's different levels, but the point is, you invest to the level. Now, I want to give you 3 common distractions. 3 common distractions that keep us, there's many more, 3 common distractions that keep us from building this sea of positive interactions within which problems become small. First distraction, I know some of you already know this already, phones and social media. It's an obvious one. I'm not saying they're bad, absolutely not. There's lots of good things to use them for. We all have them. It's totally fine. The point is, again, I've literally seen parents dropping their kids off somewhere, and they're just distracted. See you. Like there's that. We were made to need that connection. A child needs an adult's attention and eye contact. When I see people at a restaurant, literally a whole family, and they're just on their devices, I'm like, why are you even spending money? Like, you should have just eaten something cheap. You should not be paying for a dinner where you don't talk. That's why I'm all for some boundaries. I'm all for boundaries, stuff like no phones at the table or blocks of time in the evening where so that conversation can happen. So you don't want to be distracted. People are losing themselves in this, and it's depleting for some of them their ocean of positive interactions. Now when there's a negative interaction, they got no room for error. Second common one is work. Now work is good. Working hard is good. Working full-time is good. Working overtime, excellent. All these sorts of things. But for some people, they can never disconnect from work. And in the middle of things, in the middle of time with friends, or at a movie with friends, or their kids are talking about something, and they're checking emails or checking texts. Oh, I got to leave this, or I got to leave this birthday party, or I got to go. They're constantly, they can never come off from work. At the end of your life, if work distracts you from making those regular deposits, now you wonder why when you got to tell your kids something, but all you ever are is on your phone or working or gone, and now you need to confront them about something, and they don't want to hear it, and you've got no cushion, you've got no room for error. You want to build lots of room for error, so you got to have time for attention. You got to have time for positive interaction. There's a third one, and many of you probably wouldn't have thought of it. First two, probably a lot of you guessed. There's a third one that is a huge, in the research and the studies, there's one that's a huge distractor that keeps people from giving attention. You know what it is? Anxiety. When a person is anxious, by definition, when you are anxious, anxiety takes your focus. It either puts it inside yourself somewhere, something you're worried about yourself or feeling bad about, or it puts it on something else outside of you that you're worried about. But anxiety is an attention thing. My attention is inward. My attention is on this thing I'm worried about. Anxiety. So you'll see people, when they're feeling anxious, they become distant. They're just distant. Like, where are you today? Hello? And they're just to themselves. And we misinterpret. People who are anxious, we misinterpret. We think they're mad. So you think a person's who's feeling anxiety, you're like, that person's mad at me. What's their problem? And then you get mad back. And you're both making withdrawals left, right, and center. When in actuality, the problem is that the person's just anxious. Now you say, well, what can I do if it's anxious? With work, I can turn it off. With the phones and social media, I can put boundaries. I can turn it off. How do I turn off anxiety? I wish we could turn it off. But even just the one little thing of you becoming aware when you are feeling anxious and it's shutting you down from family members, friends, or coworkers, even just to say, you know what, I'm so sorry, I'm a bit distant. I wish I could, I don't know why, I just feel anxious right now. I'm stressed about that. Just saying that, just being aware and acknowledging it, you know what that does in the relationship? And then the people go, oh, because when you're feeling anxious, you don't look or feel warm. You're not trying to be mean, you're not trying to be upset, but when you're anxious, that's what everybody around you thinks you're being. So when you say, I'm just feeling stressed, they go, now people feel, oh, I feel bad for you. Okay, no problem, I get it, makes sense. I just solved a whole bunch of you and your marriage problems right there. Boom. So, reflection time. Look at me. I'm 10 seconds over, and we're at this is beautiful. So, reflection time. 3 things to think about. Or just pick one thing. 3 is quite a bit. Kind of the reflection time is just me reading through the reflection time. You ever notice that? What is one thing from this sermon you do well? Maybe you're good at honesty. Maybe you're good at not being critical. Maybe you're good at giving attention. What's one thing from this sermon you struggle with? What's one thing you want to take from this sermon? Paul put it in the Bible. He didn't have the vocabulary of bids for connection. But it's amazing that 2,000 years later, some of the biggest research done on this stuff shows that this little thing, giving people attention, building that big bank deposit of positive interactions and attention, will do wonders for your relationships. Because 69% of your problems are not going away. Good news. Thanks for coming to church. Why don't you bow your heads with me and close your eyes? Take a deep breath. Father in heaven, what is one thing we can take with us from this morning at church? From your word, you told us we're going to have to be humble and gentle and make allowance for each other's faults. We want to become black belts in making allowance, in making room for error, in communicating with honesty instead of criticism. And you're going to help us because we're asking you for help. Thank you for this church family. Thank you for everybody who's watching online. Thank you for the amazing camps we just ran and all the awesome relationships that were built at camp. Just amazing. A blessing on each person here and online today. In Jesus' name we pray. And all God's people said, Amen. Amen.